Chris Petter. I'm the treasurer of Princeton City School District. This is our tax budget hearing. This meeting was rescheduled for Monday night, January 6th to tonight, January 8th, because of the drastic amount of snow we all received and the roads were all locked up, school canceled, so here we are tonight. This is just a hearing, public hearing, so if the public wishes to comment about the tax budget before it is submitted to the board for approval, that is the time that the public can do this. The annual requirement, we do it every year. Basically, the tax budget is presented to the county, and it is our defense of how we will use the tax dollars we receive. The general fund tax dollars, the bond account tax dollars, and the PI, permanent improvement tax dollars. The county, remember, runs on a calendar year, so we are also kind of transitioning our numbers from our fiscal year, July 1, June 30, into a 1/1 to 12/31 accounting. Submit these to the Board of Education. It's a nice little spreadsheet that has to go to the county, and we will ask them to approve that during the regular meeting later tonight. If there are no questions, our hearing is over. Thank you.
For the 2025 organizational meeting. This meeting is a meeting of the Princeton Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There's a time for public participation during the regular meeting. At this time, we will take the roll. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Present?
Mrs. Kessler?
Here.
Mrs. Wider?
Here.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Here.
Mrs. Moore is absent.
Yes. And now, the Pledge of Allegiance led by our superintendent.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Card. We will go to item number 2, which is the 2025 organizational business. A, nomination and election of president.
I nominate John Simons for president.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wider?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes. B is the oath of office for the President of Board of Education, Princeton City School District, administered by the treasurer.
You want to do it there, or you want to do that? I state your name.
I, John Simons,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge my duties
as President of the Board of Education
as President of the Board of Education
of the Princeton City School District,
of the Princeton City School District,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
to the best of my abilities
to the best of my ability
and in accordance with the laws
and in accordance with the laws
now in effect
now in effect
and hereafter to be enacted
and hereafter to be enacted
during my continuance in said office
during my continuance in said office
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
and until my successor is chosen and qualified. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a nomination and election of the vice president.
I I nominate Jody Kessler.
Second. The nomination has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Parra?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Nomination is approved. The oath of office of the Vice President, Board of Education, Princeton City School District.
Okay.
I state your name.
I, Jody Kessler,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and the Constitution of the State of Ohio,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge
my duties as Vice President
my duties as Vice President
of the Board of Education
of the Board of Education
of the Princeton City School District,
of the Princeton City School District,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
Hamilton County, Ohio,
to the best of my ability
to the best of my ability
and in accordance with the laws
and in accordance with the laws
now in effect
now in effect
and hereafter to be enacted
and hereafter to be enacted
during my continuance in said office
during my continuance in said office
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
and until my successor is chosen and qualified.
Okay, approval to set dates and times of Princeton Board of Education meetings in 2025. Has everyone seen the list of the dates?
I have not had a chance to, I've seen it, but haven't had a chance to cross-reference it.
What do you want to do?
It doesn't matter. If I can't, I mean, I'm this one.
All right,
I'll
let's,
make a motion. Shall I make a motion?
yeah, make the motion.
Okay. I move to approve the dates and times of Princeton Board of Education meetings for 2025 as presented.
Second.
Properly moved in second. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. Appoint Ohio School Board Association, otherwise known as OSBA, Legislative Liaison, 2025. That was Gina last year, wasn't it?
Was it? thought
I
she
believe
was
so.
student achievement.
No,
She wasn't.
You were the Legislative Liaison?
I was student achievement.
No,
I believe
so
so.
was it
Gina was
Gina?
Legislative
I don't-
Is that why
Liaison.
she went on the floor at the OSBA meeting?
She did what?
Remember, she was down on the floor when you were up there, she was on the,
Oh, that's
floor.
right. No,
Yes.
no, it's not, that's
believe
not the
so.
same thing.
Not the same thing?
That's a delegate. She was a
Oh.
delegate.
okay.
Well,
I don't know who the I don't know who that was.
I think it was Gina.
You think it's
I think it
Dozier?
was.
I don't,
so can we
Can-
nominate someone
see,
who's not here?
I don't know if I want to without her saying she wants to do it.
Well, we can always change that.
You can,
Can we change it?
Jody?
and I think she'd like it.
Yeah,
Yes,
Oh.
we can always change.
yes.
Okay.
So Mary, since you're going to be there anyway, you should be the liaison, correct?
Hmm.
Since you're going to be there anyway, you can be the liaison.
Actually,
I don't
chair
know.
of the legislative committee.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be chairing it, the committee,
Yes.
at the state level, so I can't be the liaison. So, do we want to nominate her?
We can change it, right?
Let's nominate.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
I think she would
nominate
like
Gina Ruffin-Moore as the legislative liaison for 2025 for OSBA.
Second. Properly moved in second. What?
And we need an alternate on this motion. Do, right?
You said what?
It says on the motion that we also list an alternate.
Oh, that's right, we do have to have an alternate.
I think I was the alternate.
Were you the alternate?
Yeah.
And I'd like to add
Okay.
Jody as the alternate.
Second that one.
Okay.
Mrs.
Thank you, I'm
Petter?
glad you called me.
That's fine.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes. Motion passes. G, Student Achievement Liaison for
Do you
OSBA.
still want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, I nominate Jody Kessler as our Student Achievement Liaison for 2025 for OSBA, and the alternate
Susan?
Was it Susan?
Be the
Yeah.
alternate.
Alternate?
And Susan Whiter as the alternate.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Motion passes. OSBA delegate for the 2025 annual business meeting.
So there was Gina and who? Wait, you the, who was the
Oh,
second?
yeah.
Who were you? Okay, that's right, because of the first year. I move to appoint Gina Ruffin-Moore as the OSBA delegate for the 2025 annual business meeting with Jody Kessler as the alternate.
Second. Properly moved and seconded. Delegate, vote, Mrs. Petter.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes,
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
motion passes. Tax abatement liaison. I believe I did that last time.
Who's that?
And Susan, you want to be the alternate for that, tax abatement?
Sure.
So who, Susan?
Yes.
Alternate? Okay, I move to appoint John Simons as the tax abatement liaison for 2025 with Susan Whiter as the alternate.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. J, approval of the board service fund budget for 2025.
Oh, is this the money for the board?
Yeah.
Okay, I move to approve the board service fund budget for 2025. Has it changed?
Second.
It has not.
This is not-
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item number 3, organizational consent for 2025.
I move to approve the 2025 organizational consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes. Number 4, which is the adjournment of the 2025 organizational meeting.
I move to adjourn the organizational meeting at 4:42.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
We are adjourned from the 2025 organizational meeting. The Princeton Board of Education regular meeting. This meeting is a meeting of the Princeton Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district business is not to be considered a public community meeting. There's a time for public participation as prescribed. Roll call, Mrs. Petter.
Mr. Simons?
Present.
Mrs. Kessler?
Here.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Here.
Thank you. Superintendent Card, Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Item D, revision of agenda.
Okay, I move to approve the agenda with these revisions. Remove H from consent agenda. move item 7, executive session, to item number 3.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mr. Simons.
Yes. Motion passes. Do we have any public comments?
I've received no forms, so.
Received no forms, okay. In that case, the new number 3 is the executive session to discuss under sections 121.22G1 to consider the employment and compensation of a public employee of the Ohio Revised Code. Well, a motion.
Second.
Oh, wait, we need a motion first. Sorry.
Oh, I thought you did, I thought you
Okay,
did the motion.
I didn't move it, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Wait, did you make the motion?
I'll take it.
Who's on
Properly
the motion?
moved and seconded.
Okay.
Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler.
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland.
Yes. Sorry about that, guys.
We are going into executive session, and then we will reconvene afterwards for the remainder of the regular meeting. Thank you. Executive session, and we will continue with the regular meeting agenda. We are currently on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded, with the reminder that number H has been removed. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler.
Yes.
Motion passes. Moving to district business. Approval of the 2025 tax budget. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the 2025 tax budget.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Discussion?
As we discussed in the earlier tax budget hearing, this is just the annual item. The board must approve our tax budget. We have to have it submitted to Hamilton County prior to January 20th. This begins that process. Now that the county will review it, they'll send us amounts and rates for the next taxing year, and it's just the cycle that we have over. You will then approve those amounts and rates, usually in April and May. So then the county side and our side will all set up for budgeting purposes.
Any other questions, comments? Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Motion passes. Approval of a resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payment of taxes. Need a motion?
I move to approve the resolution requesting the county auditor to make advance payments of taxes.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Discussion?
This also is an annual item we do every year. This allows us to ask for early payments of our taxes instead of waiting to a final settlement time. So we usually ask for 3 to 4 different advances before final settlement, and usually April. So we need our money so we can have our tax dollars. Cash flow can work evenly over the next 3 months, because we haven't received any taxes since October. So this is where our cash flow cycle, we're running a little tight right now. We don't want to have to pull money out of investments, so we'll ask for an advance this week, so.
Any other comments? Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. C, approval of a resolution agreement for a due process claim.
I move to approve the resolution declaring it necessary for a tax levy.
No,
Nope.
C,
Next
Second.
one, before.
That's
the
not
one
it?
before, the due process claim.
Okay, I'm confused.
C.
Oh,
C.
I move to approve, sorry about that, and I'm looking right at it. I move to approve the resolution agreement for a due process complaint as presented.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item D, approval of a resolution.
Now I move to approve the resolution declaring it necessary for a tax levy as presented.
Second. Properly moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter,
Yes.
discussion?
As we knew this time would come, since we did not pass our levy in November, we're now hope to put an issue on the ballot. This is step number 1 for the board, this resolution. This would be a $12.8 million levy for 10 years. We could talk a little bit about how we heard when we were talking to the public that they were not necessarily as happy with the continuing levies that last forever as they have passed in the past. So we can levy for a certain amount of money for a certain period of time, up to 10 years. So this would be on May 6th, a $12.8 million levy for 10 years. The 12.8 equates to 6 mils.
And we'll be, like it's mentioned earlier, I'll have this in my superintendent report, but I'll just do it now. We'll have some listening sessions to the community to hear. As Ms. Petter said, we heard about them about the continuing levy, and we had a lot of conversation in our community conversations about that. So we adjusted that, and we think that'll be beneficial. And then the listening sessions, you can find those on the website, on social media, wherever you'd like to be, at our school buildings. Everybody's welcome. Come to one you want to come to. You don't have to be at your school or any of that nature. Come when it works for you. They won't be like community conversations to where I was up speaking and Ms. Petter was speaking. This will be more just listening and taking notes and doing those things. So just want to make sure everybody understands that.
Any other questions? Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore? Oh, sorry. Mr. Simons?
Yes. Motion passes. Item 5, academic update.
Yes, thank you. We have Dr. Falsnall, and I believe Mr. Stallings will come up and give us some information on our discipline attendance data. So we appreciate them putting this together for us.
Good evening. Mr. Stallings and I are going to talk about our first semester student discipline data as well as attendance data. And we're going to talk about a 4-year comparison in terms of discipline, 21-22 school year through the first semester of this school year. So certainly I have a lot to celebrate when looking at our discipline data. This first slide shows our discipline referrals by student subgroup for the first semester of each of the last 4 school years. I'm happy to report that really year over year we've had overall 30.18% decrease since the 21-22 school year for overall office referrals. For our out-of-school suspensions, we have decreased overall. There was a bit of a spike from the 21-22 school year into the 22-23 school year, but then a significant drop. We've decreased by 36% since that first semester of 22-23. This slide shows office referrals by grade level. You can see where these office referrals tend to peak in those transitional grades, 6th grade, 7th grade, and then again in 9th grade, and then start to drop off throughout high school, which is certainly what we expect to see. But really, year over year, seeing a decrease in the overall number of referrals has been helpful. We understand that some students may receive multiple referrals for whatever behavior or infraction that may cause, so we look very closely at our students that maybe receive 3 or more office referrals in a given school year. And this bar graph on the left in all red shows our number of students for the first semester each of the last 4 school years that at that time had 3 or more office referrals, and that has steadily decreased by a little over 29% since the first semester of the 21-22 school year. The graph on the right shows expulsions, and it shows 2 different pieces of information. The number of students that we've recommended to go to the expulsion table for some more extreme behaviors, and then the number of students that we actually followed through and expelled. Many times when our students come to the expulsion table, we find an alternative path or level of support, different placement, learning environment, and so on, and reserve expulsions for the most extreme cases. But we've seen a little bit over 37% decrease from that 22-23 school year to now in students that are seeing Mr. Stallings at the expulsion table. So certainly a lot of work to still be done, but also a lot to celebrate because we're significantly reducing those disciplinary incidents. And I'll share in a moment some of the things that we've done across our buildings to help support students and to help curtail some of those behaviors. So not to belabor the discussion by reading this word for word, but how we are addressing discipline in all 11 of our buildings is through our MTSS or multi-tiered systems of support process, as well as positive behavior intervention and supports. So we look very closely at students' social emotional instruction, the counseling that we're providing in schools, and also the mental health services that we have in each of our buildings. We review the data that I'm sharing with you today quite often with our building administration, and we also have those conversations and talk through certain behaviors when things are recommended, just to ensure that the consequence is the proper step or the consequence fits the behavior. Our building administrators and staff work very hard in setting expectations, providing intervention when needed, and rewarding or recognizing positive choices. We provide mentoring in our buildings with trusted adults working with students to provide restorative support if a student had spent some time out of school for an out-of-school suspension, making sure that the students are re-entering the building, having those supportive conversations and helping to ensure that the action is not repeated again or the behavior is not repeated. And you can see on the chart I shared a few slides ago, our students with multiple referrals has drastically reduced. Continued work on equity and cultural competence among our staff and school community. We still have substance abuse counseling in place if we have any violations regarding vaping, tobacco, or substance use. Social emotional learning curriculum in our buildings. I mentioned mentoring already. Our district leadership team and our building leadership teams review this data quite often as well to look for trends and analyze individual referrals to make sure that we have common expectations and common follow-through among our 11 buildings. And then things as simple as specific building logistical adjustments, such as, for example, limiting or getting rid of the use of lockers to eliminate hallway traffic, taking steps to make sure students are traveling in one direction, using e-hall pass in our secondary level buildings. All of these things have helped to drastically reduce our disciplinary incidents for our students. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stallings at this time to go over our chronic absenteeism, which is a measure on our district report card. So turn it over to Mr. Stallings.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Chronic absenteeism is, again, important in our district. The main thing is we want kids to be in school. So with that, it's easier said than done. Everybody has sometimes an unforeseen situation. Part of what we get to do is we look at the importance behind the gap closing and how this affects our district report card. Dr. Fosna and I run reports on the 1st and the 15th of each month. During that time, I will send emails out to our staff, mainly our building principals, to discuss where they're at and if they're meeting the indicator. Fortunately for us, we are meeting the indicator, and we have a lot of buildings that are actually thriving this year, which is a great thing to celebrate. As it says on here, our district rate has nearly been cut in half since the 2020 and 2021 school year. This can fluctuate, just being honest with you, but I am confident and I'm happy with the work we've been putting in. Part of what we do is we have our quarterly meetings where we're sitting down and we're meeting with our principals to be able to discuss how we can continue to improve this by identifying kids. And I'll talk on that on our next slide. But if you look at this, this is kind of a snippet of what our principals would receive. They have their own building goal, as well as what the state-specific goal is. I'll send them a report, tell them if they're meeting the indicator, and they're able to look and see where the fluctuation can be at times of if they're growing or if they're declining. And then that makes our meetings a little bit more meaningful when we sit down and talk about students that are having some difficulties or if they're just thriving in ways to continue the success. Steps to addressing the attendance is, again, just setting clear attendance policies, talking with our families to ensure that they understand the importance of being in school, which ultimately leads to sometimes us finding different things and avenues of why kids are not coming to school. One of the main pushes that we're doing is, again, make the environment to where everybody feels welcome. And I feel like our administrators have done a great job of that. Using the data, as I discussed before, Dr. Fosna and I, again, this whole district is really data-driven because that tells the story of what we need to do to really effectively help our kids. So we review attendance data. I sit down again with the quarterly meetings that we have in each building to discuss the students, some of the concerns the staff is having, as well as ways to actually help those students. And then again, off of that, we have our regular truancy meetings where I sit down with our truancy officers to discuss what they're seeing and how we can help kids. And within that, sometimes that leads into residency checks as well. A residency check is not always a bad deal because it is great when we're able to do wellness checks to figure out if somebody is really going through an unforeseen event, get to the bottom of an issue, work with the family to get the kid in school. I'm proud to say we've been able to do that on numerous occasions today. So kudos to the staff for being able to step up, identify where there's issues because of the relationships we're building in the district, and to be able to get kids where we want to be able to see them, which is in school, and to be able to give them the services that we work diligently to have to provide them success. Part of our intervention strategies would be conducting the attendance meetings, which we have on a regular basis, also providing targeted support. Again, that may look like mentoring, it may be counseling, the mental health support, and as well as tutoring, just to address different situations that may come up to help kids feel valued and understanding the school is an asset and we're here to help them. So if you can change the thought process sometimes with the kid by telling them that we work for them versus them working for us, it's kind of a unified approach. And the last thing that we do, and I've been more so in the elementary level, is the incentives. And I think a lot of our principals at the elementary level love to run wild with the ideas. And some of the ideas have been super creative and beneficial to creating that environment, again, where we want kids to feel like this is a place to come and a safe place to be at. And that is it.
Thank you. Are there any
Question.
questions?
Yes.
Sir.
Why do we stop the incentives at the elementary school level?
I don't think we stop them. I think it's just, it looks different. You know, if you talk about the age, it's hard to give somebody maybe a pizza party or something because of budgeting. But there's still ways to incentivize at the high school level. But I think that's more so the natural progression of understanding that school is important and it counts. So we need you here, and we're going to love up on you with a collective team approach of people.
Do we provide any incentives to the parents?
I would say at this time, it's difficult to say, more so for the parents to push the kid there, but it is something that is being looked at. I think the bigger piece is that we're working with the family to figure out what can we do to help support you. In a lot of those cases, it's something else that could be extreme as to why they're not getting to school, which has been most of the cases.
Question, can you go back a little bit and describe what is a discipline referral?
Yes. So I'll go to our first slide right after the title. So a discipline referral is entered through Public School Works, which is our online safety and behavior management system. So a discipline referral is when a student exhibits conduct that's worthy of visiting the principal at the very least. So that written referral then gets processed by the building administrator, could be initiated by an administrator, could be initiated by a teacher, paraprofessional, or other staff member, but that's essentially a trip to the office. It may result in no consequence. It may result with a counseling session, with a parent conversation, may result in something as extreme as a recommendation for expulsion. Just depends on the behavior that led to the referral.
And to that end, when a student is being referred, what are we doing in terms of PD for staff, in terms of how do you identify a student to be referred? I'm just trying to understand that whole process.
Yes, that's a very good question. We look at that very closely. Building administrators have been working with their staff on determining, it's not an exhaustive list, but a general understanding of classroom managed behaviors versus office managed behaviors, and really kind of establishing that hierarchy of, okay, these types of things can be handled in the classroom, could be just a discussion, further developing that relationship or so on. These types of things would warrant a trip to the office. Our student handbook also governs that a bit as well. But I know there are numerous conversations between administration and staff on policies and procedures within the buildings. We've even gone so far as looking at office referrals and kind of picking them apart and dissecting the appropriateness of the referral, what could be some alternatives that we could have put in place, looking at your referrals from the past that have already been processed and analyzing to determine next steps.
And I would say, I think that's helped some of the referrals going down. There's a lot of things that have helped, but I know I've had setting conversations as well. It's like, why wouldn't this handle in the classroom or whatever the case may be, and having conversations. One thing they both said that's so important to me, and when I think about in this role and in my time as a teacher and all the way through as a principal and everything, was the relationships. I think I want to give our administrators kudos. I feel like they're doing a pretty good job of building relationships. Where attendance is better, we're checking it, but I think kids want to be there because they feel like they're a part of something. I also feel like when you have better relationships, and I'll just use my personal experiences, I taught in two districts, Princeton being one, and the relationship piece was really valuable for me, and I didn't have a lot of discipline because we had an understanding in class of the expectations I had of them, and I think a lot of our teachers are doing a better job of that. We always want to get better, but I feel like just what I'm seeing of just in the year and a half I've been here, when I go in the buildings and see those things, our staff, teachers and staff are doing a better job of seeing what needs to be consequence or maybe just a conversation, and that's a good thing.
Well, I was asking all that because I'm still concerned with seeing so many of our African-American males. It appears, when I'm looking at the numbers, even though they're coming down, is an awful lot that are being disciplined, and I just wanted to understand, is that a cultural issue? Is it really black males tend to be need more discipline? I mean, for me, it's just between that and ED. I also was just trying to understand why those numbers are so far different than every other group on here.
Yeah, you raise a good question with that. That's something we're continuing to examine as well in our equity discussions. We discuss that very topic quite often. We look at internal classroom management and the cultural competence of our staff and how they respond to all students. That's something we're continuing to monitor very closely, and we want to see that continue to even out a bit. And just to clarify as well, the because we have two different classifications, ED could be emotional disturbance, which is an eligibility category for IEP. ED on this chart is actually economically disadvantaged.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question, is what is ED as referred to on this chart? But then to my original comment, then for me, it becomes, is it a cultural issue? And that's why I was asking about the PD. You know, are we really working with our staff so that they can better identify discipline versus, you know, someone who's just speaking their mind, you know, for instance. So again, I hope we're working hard at looking at that, because year after year, every time I see this chart, I bring up the same thing. You know, I'm concerned about those numbers.
I know I've sat in equity meetings quite often. I think there's a lot of conversations taken back to the building with that. That is a great question. And I've been in different districts, and that hasn't been in all districts, so continue to have that. I think, hopefully, my thought is with what's getting better, that some of that stuff's working, but it's not good enough. We understand that. So we continue to work hard and go there.
A lot of it is, sometimes it is pushback, and I do feel the support from Mr. Carter and Mr. Fosnall, especially when it comes to higher issues that come up. It might lead to the table to a motion, and we sit down and we look at some of those and say, like, is this really defensible to bring the kids to the table? And we've been able to overcome that with the conversation as to why. And again, your handbook's in place, you have reason, but to be able to have people that support you, it's not that we're saying it's wrong, but to look at it, like you said, from a different lens of, is this an emotional decision, or is this a decision that's really the correct consequence for you? And that's been a bright spot to shine on. I hate to talk about that aspect,
Right.
but I think as we start to see more push of those conversations, that will over time.
And then to that end, when I looked at black males, I think it's the second chart, when you broke it down by grade level, by the time they got to the 12th grade, they're the least. And I was trying to understand, so what happened? You know, in the 9th grade, all the way through, for the most part, your black male population seemed to have the most referrals. And then suddenly they get to the 12th grade, is that where they just, voice is no longer there? I mean, what's happening that, or is the discipline just better? I mean, they're acting better? I guess I didn't understand that
I
either.
think my 2 cents on that, I'll let those guys go, is as we've seen this, I've been in buildings for a lot of years, you know, you get to 6th grade and you're in a new setting and there's some issues, but as kids mature,
Right.
they handle situations better. So I know as a younger man, I didn't handle situations as well as I handle them now. As I've grown, I think that has a lot to do with it, the maturity level of our students as they just naturally as they grow as adults. I don't know what you guys have to add, but that's just my initial thought process.
Okay, because again, it just seemed off for me that if the discipline is such that they're so high throughout, then what happened when you look at from grade level to grade level? So that was the other thing. And then the last question I have is, can you give us a breakdown on the 3 or more referrals by student subgroup and also by grade level?
Yes, I can generate that and share that with
Thank
you.
That's it?
I just want to add, I know how much work that is to get that chronic absenteeism where it is, and I just want to thank everyone who, I know that that's a fight that never ends. So thank you to everybody, all the buildings, on working on that. That's huge. That's what I told
And these
Mr.
gentlemen have
Simon.
done a great job. Our attendance
Yeah.
folks have done a great job. Our administrators have done a great
Yeah.
job. Sometimes the way they calculated chronic absenteeism,
Yeah.
I don't agree with, but they don't ask me. They don't ask. Well, they do ask me, and I tell them. They don't listen. How about that? So, you know, we understand that, but they've done a great job, and you know, really has been good. You know, having conversations with these gentlemen and things they're doing, and with our attendance people and things of that nature. I try to touch base from time to time. So I'll say the same. Very happy with the work you're doing. Like I said, we always want to get better. You know, till it's zero, so we're always going to strive to get better and better. These charts show us getting better. Hopefully, the next time we see, we're going to continue to get better and better and better. So I want to say thank you to everybody involved as well.
One last question for me. Some people have pushed to have the high school start at a later time. Would that impact absenteeism at all, in your opinion?
I'm gonna be honest, I think.
I would say, I mean, that's something I think you need to survey. Without really knowing everybody's situation, it's hard to make that decision for me, being in this year. Yeah, later starts are better, but then there's still those situations where I think we're dealing with more the influx of the mental health aspect and the value piece of being in school that you still would have to, consider if you push the start time.
And I'll throw my 2 cents from my building administrator time. As when I was a building principal, we were assistant, and then the principal, we were 7:15 start, and then we became an 8:05, and we still had absenteeism because just another hour they sleep, they stopped. I used to wait at the office when they're coming with their Starbucks and let them have it every once in a while. So my experience is it didn't make a difference, but that was 10 years ago now. So that could be different now. I'm just going back some years that I've seen 7:15 start, I've seen 8:05 start, and a lot of times, unfortunately, with some of the same young folks, and there's various reasons why, but it's hard to tell. But in my experiences as a building administrator, it didn't make a huge difference as far as attendance went.
Well, they were probably caught in that Starbucks line.
That's exactly where they were. I used to go over there sometime and pull them out. Didn't I?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, first reading of the curriculum guide.
Yeah, the Polaris Star Curriculum Guide just gives you a description of all the courses available for our parents. So this is just for you guys to look over to our next meeting. I would appreciate if you have questions, concerns, things you see, please send them to myself, and I'll work with my team to get those answered. So that's just what that is. That's something we do it yearly.
Is there any major things that we need to look at?
Just those minor tweaks, nothing really major there yet. That's something, like you said, we're gonna have some conversations around that. This will be for next year, so the next one will be, but I think it's something we can look at. We always want to make sure our program is something that our students want, so we want to continue to look at that, as we talked about.
I was hoping that we could add in the Polaris, if we could add the pathways. I know that when parents go to the advanced studies meetings, they get a pathway, and it's on the website too. But, I mean, technically, fifth grade parents are looking at this Polaris thinking about coming to Princeton Middle School and literally scheduling from 6th grade to 12th grade. And it's overwhelming. So I think we have the pathways by subject. So if I like math, I'm good at math, I can kind of see the math pathway or the English pathway. But I really like on the website we have the advanced studies pathways, or if you wanted to go, let's say you wanted to do IB, what do you need to take in 7th grade, 8th grade to be able to take the full IB diploma your junior and senior years. And CCP, a pathway to that. So that's something I was hoping we could add.
Okay, we'll look at it for sure.
Any other comments at this time? Okay, reports, treasurer's report.
Just to let the board know, we did finish the audit. I believe it was at approximately 4-something on December 31st, but we met the deadline. It's always fun when we get down to the end, getting those last few things handled. But there were 2 comments, and we will be addressing those. No, nothing major. It's now at the state, so we're waiting for the state to review what the audit firm did. Then as soon as we have that completed, I'll report out to the board at that next meeting. Cup report I sent each of you, finally got this. I mean, I love this data. I think this is, whenever we're talking to people about any of these data points, I think it's always good to use the cup numbers. People can go straight to the state, they can run this report, and it has all kinds of fantastic little data points. I sent you this in email. I included what the state has decided are our similar districts. That's always fun to look at too. But on our spreadsheet I ran, I included, you know, our local districts, Lakota, Sycamore, and Mason, just so you could compare our numbers with them. Again, everything from demographics to cost per pupil to property valuations, just a great little cheat sheet to keep in your back pocket, a big back pocket. So, but this should be our source whenever we talk about this information. It can easily be checked and verified. I also sent you the email about the PUP change again. Remember in 21 when this happened, and I've had that bullet on my presentation. I actually thought in November, maybe I should take it out. It hasn't happened for a while. But the state reduced the valuations for Duke, and we don't get to know the information, so we can't even argue it until we see the valuation from, and Hamilton County receives it also. They don't know it ahead of time either, so it's a state decision made. We don't get any information. I once again talked to the people at the auditor's office in Hamilton County. They don't have details. It's not public information. I once again contacted the board's attorney to talk to again. He once again told me that's really nothing we can do except reach out to our legislators about opening up this process. I mean, really should, the public should be able to ask questions about this. This is gonna cost us $800,000 in lost revenue. Now, I mean, we got the information at the very end of December, and it affects our taxes we will receive, our revenue this half, and then so another 800 next half. So it's a $1.6 million loss per fiscal year in revenue. I think it was under $1 million last time when we lost that. I feel like it was in the $900,000 range last time. But again, so frustrating to do a forecast and not be able to have information and that kind of impact on us. But so we might have to put a nice little letter together to our legislators about this.
And I think too, we talked about this, you know, I talk to legislators and have those conversations, but I think something that we need to do better, and we've talked about this, and that's on me, is to make sure our community members know this and get them to reach out as well. Whether it's this, whether it's vouchers, whether it's whatever things that are not great for us. So that's something we're going to work on doing, because I think it would be good to coming from constituents, not just the superintendent,
Yeah,
but
I would
the
agree.
community. So
Taxpayers.
we've talked about that as
Vote,
well.
they're
Yes.
voters.
Yeah, they're
Yes.
voters,
So
yeah.
just so you know, we talked about putting some things together and trying to get it to folks so they know what, you know, we work with the Alliance of High Quality Schools, and they give us a lot of information about bills and House bills and Senate bills, and they do a great job. It's one of the meetings I always want to be on because it's just good stuff. So some of the things they talk about, you know, they'll tell us, hey, call your legislature call them about this, call them about that, and I do that. But I want to get it out to the community more, so that's a goal of mine, just so you know.
Okay. Is that all, Chris?
That's it.
Superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you, sir. Really, I got to give a huge thank you to our maintenance, our operations, our custodial staff. You've seen all the snow we just received. And then I want to thank Mr. Fricky as well, our Director of Operations, because I don't like to drive in that stuff. He comes and picks me up and drives me around so I can look at the roads at 4 in the morning, 4:30. We were at 10, we were at 6 last night, whatever it was. So I appreciate that, because, you know, I trust you more than I trust myself on those roads. But really, if you've seen the work they put in, I mean, we came here in the morning at 10, and the custodian here, we went all over. I'm just the one here was here, and he was blowing stuff in the back, and we said some things we saw, and then we came back at like 6:30 the night, and he was out there the night before. He's out there doing the front walkway, and all our people were doing those things. What I will tell folks is, when we get that much snow, things won't be perfect. They just won't. And I try to make decisions on what we're going to do with school based on trying to keep kids safe, and everyone's safe and our staff safe, but also trying to be in school as much as possible. So we get all the information, and we make decisions based on the information we have. So, we had some things going. So even yesterday with the 2-hour delay in the morning, the information we had the night before changed that morning when Mr. Fricky called me at 4:30 in the morning. So we adjusted that, and did a 2-hour delay. So we are always looking at that. I understand that end all be all comes with me. I also understand that no matter what decisions are made, someone may not work for them. I get that. I'm a parent. I was a parent. My kids, I have one more at Princeton High School, so I get it. And it makes some things hard, but we're always looking out for safety, based on what we get from the information we have. So I just wanted to put that out there, and we'll go from there. I mentioned listening sessions coming up. You can find it on the website, so I don't want to get into that. But also the other thing that's going on, a lot of winter sports is in full go. Basketball, girls and boys, wrestling, girls and boys, swimming, girls and boys, bowling, girls in AQT, all those things. So if you can get out and support our athletes, that would be great. As I talked about in December with our music department, we're doing great things, and now they're doing those things. So I think that's really, I love going to watch our kids do things. It makes me happy to see them strive for what they love to do. As a former athlete, that's something I really love. I was in the band too. I wasn't very good in elementary and junior high, but I did do that for a little bit too, so I had to give that up. But it's just great seeing our kids find their passions outside of the classroom. So if you're ever able to get out, please do support the kids, and I think you'll, they represent us well, and it's really nice. So that's it.
Any comments? I only have one comment. I think you did a great job as far as making decisions on the information you had. But I think as we all consider our budget cuts in the past, present, and future, Princeton is only as strong as its weakest link. And right now, our bus service is our weakest link when it comes to snow days. So Princeton's ready. We just have to find out what the real factor is, what our weakest link. And right now, that's our bus service.
Well, I'll address that a little bit. I think we've had some turnover. We talked with them today. We have some things in place. So my feeling will be, it's going to be better. So I can not get upset. That's all I'm going to say about that.
It's tough to admit failure.
I hear you.
If you're a vendor, it's tough to admit failure.
Understood.
Mrs. Kessler, Ms. Cleveland,
I'm good.
Mrs. Wider,
Excuse me?
any other comment?
No, sir. I agree with
We have motion to adjourn?
second.
Probably moved in second. Mrs. Patter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wider?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
We are adjourned.
Run.